Welcome to Air Crash Investigation, the podcast, the show where we dissect and discuss prominent crashes in aviation history. I'm your host, Kai, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Egypt Air Flight 990, the crew, the crash, the investigation. Before we continue, if you're listening on Spotify in particular, there's that thing at the bottom where you can tell me what you think about the episode, so please tell me your thoughts there. And then, of course, if you're listening on other podcasts, the same platforms, then please don't forget to rate the podcast to YouTube. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And one more thing, and the last thing that I want to mention before we start with this episode is that the podcast actually has a Patreon. On this Patreon, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes content, a lot of early access to the episodes that appear on here. But yeah, there's just a lot of things there. So if you have the means and you'd like to support the podcast, then please go check it out. A link will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy the episode.
Stay tuned.
And there's no fuel.
Closing in, looks like they've...
Egypt Air Flight 990 was a scheduled flight for the 31st of October 1999. Its origin was Los Angeles International Airport, Los Angeles, the United States of America, and its destination was Cairo International Airport, Cairo, Egypt. Its stopover was at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City, New York, the United States of America. The aircraft used was the Boeing 767-366ER, and I feel like I want to make an episode specifically on Boeing because there's a lot of things that has been coming up about the airplane manufacturer in particular, so let me know if you want that. The call sign was Egypt Air 990. The captain of this flight was Ahmed El Habashi, who was 57 years old. He had a total of 14,000 flight hours with 6,377, and he was an experienced pilot. The first officer was Gamil Al-Batouti, sorry if I said that wrong, was 59 years old. He was the relief first officer. The first officer initially was Adel Anwar, but he disembarked, and he had 12,000 flight hours with 5,200 flight hours on the 767, he being Al-Batouti. The chief pilot was Captain Hatem Rashdi. There were 203 passengers on board, and they were from different places including Canada, Egypt, Germany, Sudan, Syria, the United States of America, and Zimbabwe. The flight. So, at 20 minutes past 1 a.m. EST, Egypt Air Flight 990 takes off from JFK International Airport's 22 right runway. At 16 minutes to 2 a.m., the aircraft reached their cruising altitude of 10,058 meters or 33,000 feet, and the autopilot was engaged. At 12 minutes to 2 a.m., Captain El Habashi left the cockpit to use the bathroom, so First Officer Al-Batouti was the only one left in the cockpit. Then out of nowhere, 39 seconds later, First Officer Al-Batouti started saying, "I rely on God." He was repeating that same saying, "I rely on God." Then at 11 minutes to 2 a.m. 45 seconds, he disengaged the autopilot. Then 8 seconds later, the engines went into idle mode and the aircraft entered a steep dive. Because of the dive, the airplane experienced 0 Gs. Captain El Habashi noticed a change in pitch, so he tried to enter the cockpit, and after some time he successfully re-entered the cockpit. The speed limit was reaching the sound barrier, meaning that the aircraft itself was passing its design limit. Sorry for the car. At 10 minutes to 2 a.m. 19 seconds, the aircraft's rate of descent was 12,000 meters or 39,000 feet per minute. Captain El Habashi, as I've mentioned, was now in the cockpit, so he tried to save the plane, and as a result, he decided to pull the control column back. As he was doing this, First Officer Al-Batouti decided to push the levers from run to cut-off position. Cut-off position basically meaning that he was shutting off the fuel flow into the engines. Captain Al-Habashi noticed the change, so he decided to push the throttles to maximum, and then he was also asking First Officer Batoti why he actually did that, and First Officer Batoti didn't really have a reason. Anyway, Captain Al-Habashi's efforts didn't work, which meant that the aircraft would start losing its power. Now, rewinding back, at 24 minutes to 2 a.m., the FDR stopped recording, and at 10 minutes to 2 a.m., 38 seconds, the CVR stopped recording. So meaning the information that I'm going to tell you now is based off of the air traffic controller's information. So at the same time that the CVR stopped working, Egypt Air Flight 990 entered a climb from 4,900 meters or 16,000 feet to 7,600 meters or 25,000 feet, meaning that they were probably okay. Until at 9 minutes to 2 a.m. 15 seconds, the aircraft entered another dive. Their rate of descent was 6,100 meters or 20,000 feet per minute, and during this dive, the left engine started to separate from the aeroplane. At 3,048 meters or 10,000 feet, the airframe started to separate due to the G-forces and the stresses. At 8 minutes to 2 a.m., sections of the aircraft started to fall into the Atlantic Ocean. Hopefully you can picture the course of the flight, meaning that they went from LAX, flew across the country, the United States of America, flew across the country to JFK for their stopover, then went to Cairo via the Atlantic Ocean. As I said, the sections of the aircraft started to fall into the ocean, and eventually the aircraft crashed. Alright, so the investigation was initially set out by the Egyptian government, or the Egyptian Civil Aviation Authority, or ECAA, but because they didn't really have the resources and there were multiple nationalities on board, the USA, aka the NTSB, got involved. The search and rescue. So at sunrise, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy training vessel found small pieces of debris in the water near Massachusetts, the United States of America. Eventually, fractured remains were found on the debris and ocean floor, and there wasn't really any. The bodies were disintegrated to the point whereby scientists and pathologists had to use the DNA to try and figure out who was who. The CVR and FDR. So the investigators found the CVR and the FDR, and they started investigating the CVR first. So they heard the captain leave to go to the bathroom. Then a few seconds later, the first officer started repeating the words, "I rely on God." If you go to the final report and read the transcript, you'll see that he says that multiple times. So then when Captain Al-Habashi came back in the cockpit, he started asking, what's happening, what's going on, what is this, did you do this? He was basically trying to save the airplane with all his might. Now, of course, why did the first officer start saying, "I rely on God," then out of nowhere the airplane enters a dive? So this was suspicious. The investigators decided to try and dissect their personal lives, and a fellow captain, Captain Hamdi Hanafi Taha, said the reason why the first officer did what he did is because of the fact that he wanted revenge. An airline executive decided to demote him to first officer, hence why he decided to crash the plane. But no one really believes that, so it's still just a theory. So the probable cause. The National Transportation Safety Board determines that the probable cause of the Egypt Air Flight 990 accident is the aeroplane's departure from normal cruising altitude and subsequent impact with the Atlantic Ocean as a result of the Relief First Officer's flight control inputs. The reason for the Relief First Officer's actions was not determined, meaning pilot error. No one really knows why he did it, and as a result there are no recommendations, so we can only assume, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of conspiracy theories that exist out there. That is the end of today's episode. Let me know what you think in the comments if you are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on any other podcast listening platform, thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.